And in fact, Tom Amos going to be heavily involved the next few weeks on the Derby Trail front, because coming up at Turfway on Saturday, Tom's going to go after the Spiral with an interesting horse, Wireless Future. And then 2 weeks later, we mentioned, of course, the opportunity coming up at the Louisiana Derby, and a horse that has been really under the radar and probably isn't getting the appreciation that he deserves, but certainly when it comes to Ron Paolucci and Chris Dunn, they want to be involved, and their purchase of War Story, and Tom Amos has guided him to runner-up finishes behind International Star in the legs leading to the Louisiana Derby. It's always a pleasure to introduce Tom Amos.
Good evening, Steve. Jeremy, how are you guys?
Tom, always good. It's St. Patrick's Day, and I suppose it might be hard in a town like New Orleans to distinguish St. Patrick's Day celebrations from every other day of the week.
Yeah, well, it's a lot like Mardi Gras, believe it or not, except the beads are green. So I was out this afternoon for a little while. It's a non-racing day for us here, and went to one of the Irish bars. Finn McCool's was the name of it, and they were having a little block party. It was a lot of fun.
Undoubtedly, it'll be a Mardi Gras-esque atmosphere at Turfway Park on Saturday. And before we get into the training conversation, give us a little bit of a little window into Wireless Future, because
Sure.
He has not gotten a lot of press, and he probably deserves a little more notice than he's received.
Well, I think this race this weekend, the Spiral at Turfway, which runs on Saturday, is one of those races that is just a hodgepodge of horses. So it's a full field of 12, and although we know who the 12 were because they had to be pre-entered on Sunday, they actually don't draw post positions till tomorrow. So the field has been drawn, but the post position will be drawn tomorrow around lunchtime, and that'll have a lot to say. You know, obviously a big field and how it sets up are important factors in anybody's handicapping, but certainly for the strategy of the horse as well. My horse, Wireless Future, has won his last 3 in a row, 2 on the grass, most recently on the dirt. He's used tactical speed each time. As a matter of fact, the last time he did his work on the lead early and maintained that advantage throughout. So he's got that dimension that you like to have in a horse, and that is the ability to do what the pace of the race suggests. And quite frankly, Florent Giroux, who's ridden him, has done a great job of judging pace and deciding where to put him. And look, it's overstated, but maybe not so much. Pace makes the race.
Now, and you talk about Florent Giroux, it might not be a coincidence. Maybe we can utilize this as part of our training discussion. The win streak, the 3 races, the Maiden Breaker and these 2 allowance wins, they happen to correspond to Giroux meeting up with the horse. We happened to, last week, had a jockey conversation, and his agent was with us, Doug Bradar, and we talked about how emergent Giroux is. Has he gotten along particularly with this particular colt? As it happens, every start, Tom, from a figure standpoint, he has improved 5 straight. So with every start, this is a horse that clearly continues to learn and improve and get better with distance.
Yeah, I think you kind of hit on it right at the very end there. He gets better with distance. There's no question about that. As a trainer, you're always fearful of a horse that's constantly stepping up and improving each start. When that improvement is gonna stop, and is there a regression there, or do you reach the limit and he runs no better than that? I'm always paying attention to that, either through the Beyer speed figures or the Ragusa numbers. So he'll look to improve again in this race. And if you look at his line and you graphed it, by line I mean his speed figures in the race, they are continually going up. Obviously, we'd like to see some more of that. And I will tell you, from the standpoint of training him, he's a horse that mentally has gotten a lot better, a lot smarter about what he's doing. So I see the correlation between how he trains and also the improved speed figures.
One of the things that we haven't really gotten to yet tonight, because we talked a little standardbred with Don Lupel, we talked with Paul Jones about the quarter horses, and so from a flat horse perspective, here is a colt that is by Scat Daddy, who has proven to be not just a good sire, but a little bit more special with turf horses. And this one's out of a theatrical mare. And so there's grass all over the place. You debuted him on the dirt going back to Churchill in November. Then you put him on the grass and started to see that improvement, became competitive in that second start, and then breaks the maiden, staying on grass, going a mile and change in that third effort on the turf. You had an off-the-turf success in February with him. Talk a little bit about the decision-making process and what goes on in a trainer's mind when they have a horse like this. We know what it means to have a 3-year-old get to the classics and what that can do for them. Certainly, Bill Lawrence and Seth Klarman love to have a classic horse, but what do you do when you have a horse that you know is probably a turf horse, but you have to give him every chance on the main?
That's a great question. So, know this horse I do. I mean, I bought him as a yearling for those guys, so I've been a part of his life since the September sale at Keeneland. And when he came into the track as a 2-year-old midsummer this year, he showed talent. Seth is always, and when I speak of Seth, I'm talking about Seth Klarman, the owner. Seth is always quizzing his trainers, of which I'm one of, as to, what they think of their horse as they're getting ready to make your debut. He pays attention, and he knows pedigree, but he's not the guy at the track training the horse, so that piece of the puzzle he depends upon us for. I like this horse a lot going into his first start, and it didn't work out for me. Ironically, the horse that won that race, War Story, was bought out of that race and ended up in my barn. I did not have to do anything with the purchase of War Story, but he did end up in my barn after that race. But anyhow, getting back to this horse, when I'm training a horse and I see what I believe is talent in the morning and it's not displayed in the afternoon, even if it's an initial start, I'm always questioning, what can I do differently to make this horse show what I think he has potentially. So you talked about sires, and in this case it's Scat Daddy. And, you can pigeonhole a lot of sires. If you were going to talk about Carson City, you'd say, hey, that's a sprint sire. In the case of Scat Daddy, he is a lot harder to do that with. His horses do everything. They dirt, they turf, they poly, they go long, they go short. So he really is, for the old schoolers out there, in my opinion, he is kind of a modern-day Clever Trick. Clever Trick was always that stallion when I was younger that I could never figure out what he did best. He did it all, his offspring, and I think Scat Daddy is that kind of sire now. But anyhow, getting back to particularly this horse, you mentioned the female side, the theatrical side. So a logical step after that dirt debut was to turn to the pedigree and do what the pedigree said. And what the pedigree said was to put him on the grass. Again, that first race on the grass was a bit of a disappointment, particularly if you're an outsider looking in, you're handicapping. Those first 2 races didn't do a lot to thrill you, but if you're intimately working with the horse like our stable was, you have a real understanding of the progression that was taking place mentally for this horse, and that's so important for any thoroughbred. It's one thing to be talented. If you don't have the mental toughness, the mental understanding of what you're supposed to be doing in a race, then it all falls apart in the end. For him, it went the other direction. He got better and better. He got smarter. He rated well on the lead as well as off the lead in his transition from sprint to route, which is important, that he paid attention to the rider's commands, sat when he was supposed to sit, accelerated when he was supposed to accelerate. Even when he won that third race on the grass, he was a little hesitant about understanding going by a horse. So all these things have come together for him, and I think that's why you see this improved line. And so if you're a handicapper and you're looking at a horse like this and you're trying to judge, what the next race is going to bring, particularly if you back up a couple of races in this form, you would be hard-pressed to be able to say, are we going to get an improvement? Are we not getting an improvement? What do you do as a handicapper to try to understand that? Well, there's a few things. Number one, you turn to the work pattern. You want to see a steady work pattern with the horse. You want it to look consistent to his other works, or if not, a little bit better as time goes on. I'm always paying attention to horses in the paddock. So if I'm at the track, or even if it's on TV and I can get a good view, I want to see what that horse displays to me physically. In the case of Wireless Future, he is a horse with a lot of stature. He's a prototypical kind of 3-year-old that you see at the Kentucky Derby. He's big, he's rangy, and he catches your eye. He's good looking. If those things are there, when I'm looking at a horse and I see some improved form, we see it all the time. 3-year-olds jump up and improve over and over again. and he has the characteristics. He displayed the characteristics as well as the physical appearance that suggested that could happen. Off all that, now we go into Saturday, and this is a whole different ball game. We're going to the polytrack, but again, you can't pigeonhole this sire, and I think polytrack will be to his liking. He breezed over the weekend. He breezed very well. He's had time over that racetrack, almost 10 or 11 days to now, and I'm anxious to see what post position we draw.
Jeremy.
Tom, Jeremy Plunk here. Thanks for joining us tonight. It's always good to have you back in night school. It's an annual thing for us, and you've always so forthright with your answers. That's why we love you. A question that comes to mind on something you mentioned about pigeonholing a sire. In this particular case, you have a horse with some form. You're going for races that are big. The pots are big. The prestige is there, and you know what the ultimate goal would be if you can get him to a Triple Crown race. But when it comes to trainer intent, and that's one of the real things people ask us a lot of questions about here in night school, when you have a young horse who doesn't have any form, first-time starter, second time out, are you too pigeonholing that horse's first race based a lot on the pedigree or more of what you see in the mornings? You know, I mean, are you debuting a horse on the turf because he's bred for the turf, or can there be other circumstances while you're doing it?
Okay, so the answer to that question is not one sentence or two sentences. There are any number of factors that I'm using in making a horse's first start. Obviously, since the horse has never started before, you're going to be doing a lot of work from the gate and getting him gate approved, gate ready, and how precocious he is from that starting gate could have something to say about where you're going to run him. Pedigree most certainly is going to have a little bit to say about where I'm going to run a horse for the first time. But I think what overrides any of that is what he's showing me in his preparations, what he's showing me in his works. You know, how precocious he is or isn't. What is his stride? Is his stride one of those quick kind of strides that suggest sprint, or is it one of those long, rangy strides like a horse like Wireless Future has that suggests route? There's so many factors that go into that. I guess in the end, if I'm a handicapper, I'm paying attention statistically to what a trainer does with a debut horse at that distance, which, you know, the racing form offers you that information when you look in the form. And if a guy is successful doing that sort of thing, I'm much more inclined to pay attention to a horse like that than I am of somebody that tends to use a start to get ready to run, and the statistics bore that out.
Tom, let me follow up, and I do want to talk about War Story and get a little advance in on the Louisiana Derby. We can do that, but I happen to notice that coming up on Friday, a horse that we talked about a lot as a 3-year-old, Rise Up, is back in, coming off the good try in the Houston Sprint Cup, and looking back at last year and at him turning the corner from 2 to 3, what can we learn as horse players about him? Because suddenly he seems like he's back on the improve. And
right.
What is there in that, what is it, 18 starts? What is there for us to learn as a horse player looking at a horse like this?
Yeah, so I think when you talk about handicapping, you talk about playing the horses, you're always looking not only at, say, a speed figure, this or that, but if a horse has certain characteristics that are going to help or hurt him in a race, and you can determine what those are, that's important. So let's talk about Rise Up. So this is a horse that has had his issues at the gate. Doesn't always leave the gate well, and when he does leave the gate well, just like any horse, he gives the field quite an advantage. We stopped on him last year because it got to the point where we weren't comfortable with how he was leaving the starting gate. He just had enough racing for a while. We turned him out and just let him kind of get his head together, and we brought him back. He never had anything physically wrong with him. And when he made his first start at Churchill, he did not win, but his gait issues seemed to be behind him. Unfortunately, 2 starts back at Fairgrounds, he showed his little trick of not leaving the gate well, and that, of course, cost us the race. Even in Houston most recently, he didn't leave the gate as quick as the rest of the horses, but he left there quick enough. What worries me the most, and should worry any horse player in that situation if they're thinking about betting Rise Up, is that we drew the 1 hole. So we're going to be the first in the gate, and if he doesn't leave the gate well, the whole field is going to be in front of him and is going to move over in front of him, and it's going to make his trip a very difficult one from the 1 hole. So I would say if he ends up being one of the favorites in that race, one of the things that I'm paying attention to if I'm playing the race is how is he leaving the gate, and can he overcome that if he doesn't leave that well? Since he's shown this characteristic more than once, you've got to call it a habit. And what is the trainer doing to try to make sure it doesn't happen again? And how much can he do with that horse from the one hole to try to prevent it from happening again? Those are all factors that go into the race on Friday. It's not simply, looking at the speed figure and seeing who the best is. So, from my perspective, I think he's one of the quickest horses in the race. But I think the post position is a real equalizer in terms of how he may perform.
When you look back at his 2-year-old season, which led to the win in the Delta Jackpot, and then you see what transpired as a 3-year-old, and then particularly the turn back when he won, going back to that Hilton Memorial at Charlestown, and he won so overwhelmingly. Now, granted, that was 7 furlongs at Charlestown, but has it turned out with this recent success and his improved season as a 4-year-old for the most part that he was a sprinter all along, that he only wanted to go one turn?
I guess time will tell. My opinion is that yes, he's a sprinter, and that's something else you can use in your handicapping. So sprinters can oftentimes get more distance on a bull ring racetrack. And so Rise Up would be a great example of that. He got 2 turns at Delta, and I believe that race was a mile and a 16th. He got 7/8 in Charlestown, which is also 2 turns. He was able to get a mile at the fairgrounds, but it was a race that he was the lone speed in the race. So he was helped by that. But I think in the end, Rise Up is a middle distance to a sprint horse.
Well, and this is one of those cases by Rockport Harbor out of a Johannesburg mare, and he to me is really one of those textbook cases, Tom, where you want to go as far on the classic trail as possible, and then regroup when it doesn't work, and then go back to whatever is really in the horse's wheelhouse.
Yeah, I mean, look, Steve, you know this as well as I do. We could probably throw 10 names out right now that are just like him. Horses that were precocious at 2, and you tried to get on the Triple Crown Trail to get to a certain race, and they just couldn't do it, and they come back, the next year, and as you say, they do what they're best at. So, I mean, all that really boils down to a stat I saw just the other day, which is, the fact that Super Saver has been the only horse to be 2-year-old champion and win the Kentucky Derby, and that's, I think, out of the last 33 2-year-old champions. So a lot changes between 2 and 3. I often tell people it's no different to looking back at yourself when you were in 4th or 5th grade and who the fastest kid in class was, and then you fast forward to when you were in 10th or 11th grade and that little scat quick kid was no longer the athlete that he was in 4th or 5th grade that he was in 10th or 11th grade. Really, that's about the progression of horses in terms of their maturity cycle. At 2, they are really kind of a grade school type of athlete, and when they go and make the Kentucky Derby, they really are kind of a high school senior or a college freshman in terms of how they've developed and what they are. And of course, when they turn 4, they're the mature pro athlete.
Tom Amos is with us. We got a couple of minutes left as we talk about trainers and angles and work that a trainer does to maximize opportunity. Let's look ahead 2 weeks to the Louisiana Derby and another horse that has not gait issues per se, but seems to be the type that gets off a beat slow. What should we look for? Has there been a gate work of late for War Story to try to sharpen him out of the box so that he can get the kind of early position he needs, Tom, to turn the tables on International Star?
Yeah, very fair question. So the Louisiana Derby runs on the 28th, and we have tried some tricks with War Story to make him a better gate horse. He debuted at 7/8. We didn't have him then, and the reason he debuted at 7/8 a mile rather than a shorter distance was because he's had this issue. So how do you take a horse that's, gone through all the repertoire of learning how to leave the gate and just doesn't do it well, and how can you make him quicker as time goes on? It doesn't always work. Zenyatta would be a good example of one that she just did what she did. I'm not putting him in the same class as Zenyatta, obviously. But anyhow, so with War Story, we tried a trick. One of the tricks we tried was in the last race, we tailed him, which means the starting gate guy will actually hold his tail and put a little pressure on it with his hand, and horses tend to want to get away from that pressure, and they'll leave the gate quicker. It didn't work. So what do we do this time? So this time we're going to put pads inside the gate, so the gate is actually more confined for him. He won't be able to rock back and forth. He tends to rock back when the gate opens because the pads will be in there and they'll confine his space, and we're hoping that makes him lead better. We did try to use them this past weekend and left the gate, and he left running. But morning practice, so to speak, and the real thing are often different for a horse, and they know the difference. We were very satisfied with how he did this weekend, leaving the gate. We just went a little eighth of a mile with him. That's the most we'll do from the gate with him as far as with the pads. Taking them too much to the gate and continually breaking from the gate, that is the hardest type of exercise on a horse, to go from a standing start. So you're not doing yourself any favors if you do that too often. But we did it once. We're happy with it. He's going to breeze tomorrow and Wednesday, and then we're going to be ready to run in the Derby on the 28th.
Tommy's going to look like Eric Dickerson in there with all the pads and the rec specs and everything. You'll have him geared up. I've got War Story number 11 in my countdown to the Crown Top 20 poll this week, leading into the Louisiana Derby. Quick answer: too high, too low, or about right?
About right. I think, look, you know as well as I do, it's way, way too early to start talking about the Kentucky Derby and who's going to be there and who's not. So I wouldn't put him any higher than that. I certainly think he's got a great deal of potential. He's another horse that's learning as he goes. I look forward to running against International Star again. We've had a couple of tough trips against him, and he certainly had a good rail trip last time, so I think we'll put on a good show, and I think we'll put on a good performance, and it'll be a fight to the finish.
You've been a great guest, but you were totally wrong about that one point. It's never too early to talk about the Kentucky Derby.
All right, guys. Well, listen, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me on.
Well, it's always a pleasure. And, Tom, good luck coming up this week. You got a handful heading out Thursday, Friday at Fairgrounds. And, of course, you and I haven't talked in the mornings, but certainly been a much better and smoother winter this year than the last couple at Gentilly.
It has. And if I can just say real quick, one of the guys who has really been responsible for bringing Fairgrounds racing back and who really held Churchill's feet to the fire is a good friend of mine named Keith T., who is our executive director of the Louisiana HBPA. And Keith is in the hospital. He's sick, and he needs everybody's prayers. So I hope you'll be thinking of him. And he's a great guy, a great leader for our industry. I'm proud to call him a friend, and say a prayer for him tonight.